All right, Battletech enthusiast. We've got a lance analysis here. What do you think of this lance? Tactics, techniques, things we should be aware of. I'm building this podcast on the comments requesting to take a look at this. And I really like enjoying, as much as Battletech is awesome to play, the other part of the game while we're not playing Battletech is talking about Battletech and looking at the different mechs and seeing how we can combine them and what we're going to do and how we're going to run these types of machines. What pairs well, what doesn't pair well. So the first question I ask before we even get to the lance, because from top down, this puts a big qualifier on how things are going to work or what deficiencies are we aware of that we either need to address or we can kind of overlook. Because certainly with whatever battle value you have assigned, I can't be everywhere. We can't be everywhere at once. Are we talking about mech versus mech or combined arms? And that's the great thing about Battletech, in that for a number of years, my Battletech experience was mech versus mechs. I knew tanks exist, I knew infantry existed, and different ways to bring in off-table support, but we were mechs on mechs. Things change vastly, even when you just start throwing some infantry into the mix. And once we start layering in some vehicles, and maybe some air support on there. So I'm going to make the assumption for this, mech versus mech, with a slight sidebar into if we were going up against tanks and infantry and you wanted to run all mechs. You're going to spend your battle value completely on your mechs. We've got a Falconer, we've got a longbow, we've got a Locust, and we have a Hunchback. Now right away I'm a little bit biased because there's 3 out of 4 of my favorite mechs in this list, but I think that qualifies me uniquely to share some of the feedback on there because I've won many victories and suffered, more importantly, many defeats, combining and running these machines and exploring different things. But that said, the first thing that kind of throws up a little bit of concern, or I should say raises a question, is the tech level. What tech level are we playing at? Because the Falconer is a little bit more advanced than the other mechs out there. They're more kind of Inner Sphere, late Star League type stuff. And while the Falconer has some amazing tech to it, the ERPPC and other things like that, do we want to bring these older mechs up to speed with some updated tech on there? Are you going to be outgunned? So, I mean, are we playing, we play something like Clan Tech or Clans, and you're bringing 3 out of 4 vintage machines, so to speak. So time period is also a little bit important in Battletech. And that's not to say some of the older machines can't work, but we need to be a little bit more aware of things on there. So that was kind of my first question with the tech, or is it just an open roster? And again, you could play Battletech that way. So we're going to make, this is if you handed these mechs and you were like, Mech Commander Fritz, command these on the table, let's go. I'm going to build up the longbow as my firebase. It throws out the 20s, the LRM 20s. It's got the 2 5s for backup. It's got redundancy. It's got range. It's got enough saturation. You really don't want to get hit by it. So we're going to make that the center point, the focus of our lance, the Locust. The Locust is going to act, Locust is an interesting machine, very fast, has the machine guns, has the medium laser. So we're going to utilize this for possibly running up the left or right flank. I don't need to stay with my main battle group with the Locust because, one, machine guns and a medium laser isn't going to add that much to it. And second of all, it can run solo a little bit because it has so much speed. Unless we're talking city fight, it has so much speed that I can get out of there if things get in trouble. So primarily I'm going to look to use this as a spotter for indirect fire. It opens up that possibility, and even with all of the range modifiers. So if you're hiding behind some buildings or some level 3 or something, as soon as I'm barely in range, if I can get indirect, I'm going to start layering those missiles on. With the longbow, even having just 1 makes indirect an option. Okay, obviously having 2 longbows and 2 archers and LRM carriers makes indirect fire saturation absolutely deadly on there. But with 1 and the Locust, that opens up a battlefield option. So you've got the direct fire with the longbow, you've got the indirect fire. People will point out, rightly so, get a Karnov, get some infantry, drop them in, works much better. But we go to battle with what we have, not always what we want. And I want to squeeze all the possible options out of there. Now, with that, can we run the Locust variant? I'm spacing on the variant number and designation, which is kind of weird because that's what I play a lot. It's the medium laser and the 2 SRM 2-packs. This turns the Locust into something very, very interesting because now a light mech has the speed to get behind and shoot with the medium laser, shoot with stuff that it has, but it also has the ability to punch from behind, mediums and heavies, I don't know, maybe even an assault if you have to. Especially if you can pin a heavy or an assault mech in front. So if you have your assault mech, you have your Atlas. I don't really want to stare down an Atlas, but you've got an Atlas, worst case scenario, or actually worst case scenario in my mind would be a Stalker. We're staring down a Stalker face to face. I know Stalker doesn't really have a face, but face to face, I've got my Warhammer in front, just kind of the what if scenario. Not that I want to go toe-to-toe, but a Warhammer, we could. And you know what? I've got a nice little mix of medium lasers and machine guns and the SRM 6-pack and stuff that I can switch from the PPCs to that at medium to short range, and I can put out some bite. If you get a light mech, if I get a light mech, I can work one behind your Stalker in this example. I'm in a good place because you're certainly not going to turn the Stalker to deal with the light mech, which you could obliterate in one turn like nothing. I lose an initiative sync on there. But then you're going to open up to be savaged for the Warhammer, and I might be tempted to shoot those PPCs to get rear armor on there. But that's punching with the light mech. A Locust doesn't have hands to punch, so you lose that. Stock Locust loses the functionality of being able to run up behind a mech and punch for that headshot. 1 in 6, those are good odds on a D6. And even if you're not going to knock the head off, it's going to force a pilot check, a consciousness roll on there. Consciousness check. And that is big in a 4 mech in a small lance game. If you can take a mech out, pass him out for a turn, and then you're just going to savage that mech. I mean, that especially if it's a heavier weight class on there, it's going to be really, really good. At that point, I will run up and risk the kick on there. So we kind of lose that with the Locust, but we regain a little bit of rear threat with the variant with the medium laser and the SRM 2-packs on there. So the Locust can do indirect, the Locust can run up the flanks, the Locust can do hit and run, and the Locust could engage from the back. So we've got those two working. Hunchback, interesting choice. And the Hunchback, I find for the battle value, you bring a big gun to bear, it's got the fists, it's got the lasers, it works as a nice bodyguard / blocking unit for that longbow, because your opponent is going to they're going to have to close to that longbow. And you're going to do your best to prevent them from that, but they are going to get close to it to bring their short and medium range weapons to bear. You know, that grasshopper running up there is going to want to get as close as it can to that longbow, especially since for the weight class, the armor isn't there, and essentially you're like a giant Saturn rocket full of fuel ready to just explode if it can crunch the numbers and get you on some internals and some ammo explosions or stuff. I mean, being a longbow pilot's a little bit risky on there. So knowing that my opponent is going to do that, I want a blocking unit to prevent that. Usually in my lists, I run Demolisher tanks, multiple AC-20s, the battle value of a tank. Yes, I can get motive hits, but I've got that 360-degree turret on there, and I'm not really traveling far from the longbow. So even if I hit the motives and take damage and get immobilized, you still have to cross that invisible line, so to speak. Hunchback can replicate that somewhat for the battle value. It's going to be forced to do that unless you're in city fight. If you're in any type of open plains or an open hex map or something with a couple of hills and elevations, you don't really want to be running a Hunchback up. But we're not going to do that. Just on the basis of the longbow, we're going to be slowly advancing, layering down that LRM 20 fire, that LRM 5 fire, indirect fire, Hunchback on guard duty getting up there. If we engage, the Hunchback can also try to work behind, and if you can get a Hunchback behind, Hunchback is a great medium mech's usually bodyguard for the heavies and the assaults and want to get behind. And if you can do that with the Hunchback, that AC-20 is going to brutalize. Now, at the same time, I can't let that AC-20 live. I can't, especially if it's mounted on a medium mech. It's got less armor on there. Compare that, of course, when you have the tonnage to an Atlas or some other, heavy or assault AC-20, Victor, something like that. That I got to chew through a lot of armor bubbles to get there. Hunchback, I lay down some firepower. I'll take it out much quicker. So by that very nature, I'm going to focus on that. We're going to utilize that. We're not going to hide the Hunchback. We're going to use the Falconer to not sit in the way of the longbow and the Hunchback, because then it'll force your opponent to engage your Falconer. That means it's going to take the brunt of it, and the Hunchback's going to be hanging back because it takes a while to get up there because you've got the short range of the AC-20 on there. I almost want your opponent to advance. I want my opponent to advance and come into that threat bubble of the longbow and the Hunchback to try and close with the Hunchback at medium range. You close with my Hunchback at medium range, I'm still outranged, meaning I'm not at range yet for the autocannon 20. So while that's happening, you're going to start shooting at me. That's when I want to engage with the Falconer. I want to keep that as kind of a floating, opportunistic machine to see what I can do. So, of course, on the table, there's a lot of... This is the starting point with a lance, where you come up with an operating plan. It may not be the plan, but it's an A plan to start. And you can do this for any mechs, any combination. You start asking, if I had these mechs, how am I going to utilize their strengths? As for their weaknesses, how am I going to kind of minimize that or keep my opponent busy? Where are we playing? What are we doing? And with that, now that's going to be modified based on, of course, what my opponent brings, based on the mission, and based on the terrain that I find myself fighting. But this is a good starting exercise for whatever lance we're going to critique or whatever we're looking to build and play in Battletech.